What exactly is technology? Clearly, this is not an easy question to answer, because technology is an extremely broad concept, and it also spans an incredibly long period of time. From the stone first used by humans to crack open nuts, to today's most advanced artificial intelligence, all of these fall within the scope of technology. Over the millions of years of human evolution, almost every major leap forward has been accompanied by progress in science and technology. Or rather, it was precisely the progress of science and technology that, in turn, drove the development of human civilization. Therefore, understanding how human scientific discoveries and technological inventions have evolved and advanced is an important part of understanding human history. It is also an important part of guiding us to see the road ahead more clearly. Because in today's world, the speed at which science and technology are developing has already surpassed the speed at which most people can update their knowledge. Virtual reality, self-driving cars, gene editing, big data, blockchain, nuclear fusion, large-scale models, these constantly emerging new terms leave people dazzled and overwhelmed. Many people do not understand their concepts and meanings. They do not know what kind of impact these technologies will have on their own lives. They also do not know where these technologies actually came from, and even less do they know what new technologies may appear in the future. As a result, many people begin to fall into what is known as technological anxiety and technological fear. The root cause of this phenomenon lies precisely in a lack of understanding of the world and a lack of understanding of the logic behind technological development. In fact, all the technological achievements we enjoy today have followed a very clear line of development from beginning to end. That line is obtaining energy more efficiently and transmitting information more quickly. It can be said that the continuous pursuit of these two goals is what has kept pushing humanity's technological level forward and has also driven the advancement of civilization. So next, let us begin from 1.76 million years ago and step into the magnificent history of human technology. Almost all animals living on Earth can only rely on their own bodies to obtain energy. Only humans, and a few close relatives of humans such as chimpanzees, possess the ability to use tools. However, as for when humans first learned to use tools and how they learned to use them, scholars can no longer provide a definite answer because too much time has passed. One reasonable guess is that early humans may have accidentally used stones to crack open nuts or to kill wild animals. Gradually, they learned to use stones. During this process, humans also gradually discovered that the sharp edges of certain stones could cut open animal hides, skin, or even chop through wood. As a result, the uses of stones began to become more diverse. However, because the stones used at the time were naturally formed rather than actively made, this did not mean that humans had already fully mastered stone as a tool. Until one day, people suddenly discovered that stones could be shaped into specific forms through striking and chipping, making them easier to use. At that moment, humanity reached a great turning point. It unlocked the ability to actively manufacture tools. The earliest known tools actively made by humans are the Acheulean hand axes discovered in Africa, dating back to around 1.76 million years ago. Although they are called axes, in reality they were simply sharp stone tools formed by striking and shaping pieces of rock. They were extremely simple, but they marked an essential difference between humans and other tool-using primates. Today, we call these humans Homo habilis, which means handyman humans capable of making tools. With convenient tools in hand, humans could obtain living materials with much less effort. The efficiency of acquiring the energy needed for survival was greatly improved. To some extent, the level of a civilization directly depends on that civilization's ability to obtain and use energy. Any animal that has survived and reproduced to this day is capable of maintaining a balance between energy acquisition and energy consumption. Humans are naturally no exception. But what makes humans different from other animals is that, besides obtaining bodily energy through food, humans can also make use of other forms of energy to make life safer and more comfortable. The earliest energy source mastered by humans was fire. The earliest archaeological evidence of human use of fire was found in a cave in Kenya, Africa, dating back 1.42 million years. At that time, humans had only just evolved into an upright form, while modern humans would not appear for more than another 1.2 million years. For the primitive humans of that time, fire mainly had three uses: keeping warm, cooking food, and driving away wild animals. First, keeping warm was the most direct use. It allowed humans to survive in extremely harsh environments, because without fire, it would have been very difficult for early humans to rely only on the energy obtained through their own physical activity and leave the warm regions of Africa. This was especially true around 100,000 years ago, during humanity's second migration out of Africa, when the Earth was in an ice age and the average temperature was much lower than it is today. Without the warmth brought by firelight, humans would have been almost unable to survive on the Eurasian continent, let alone cross the Bering Strait and reach the Americas. The second use of fire was cooking food. However, this skill was actually used by humans very late. This is not to say that humans did not like eating roasted meat, but because in the early period, humans had almost no meat to eat. The time when humans mastered relatively advanced hunting skills came only after the appearance of modern humans. Before that, they mainly survived by gathering wild fruits. Therefore, the so-called stage in which humans ate raw meat and drank blood was actually very short. Because before humans had the ability to capture large animals, they had already mastered the technology of using fire for more than 1,000,000 years. So when humans became able to hunt prey on a large scale, they soon began eating cooked food. And cooked food was extremely important to the path of human evolution. In the age when humans were still eating wild fruits, they had to spend almost 10 hours a day searching for food and eating food. In this way, it was very difficult for humans to migrate over long distances, let alone change the surrounding environment. But after cooked food appeared, the speed at which humans ate increased greatly. This gave them the time and energy to engage in activities other than simply filling their stomachs. In addition, because of the appearance of cooked food, human teeth gradually became less sharp. This created more space for the further development of the brain. And the nutrients in cooked food, which were easier to absorb, also provided the foundation for the evolution of the brain. As for where the earliest fire used by humans came from, there is no definite answer. Scholars generally believe it came from forest fires caused by accidents. However, all animals have a natural fear of fire. How primitive humans at that time overcame this fear and brought fire back to their tribes, and why they wanted to bring fire back to their tribes, still remains a mystery. The third use of fire was to drive away wild animals. But this function was not only reflected in the fact that primitive humans could use fire to scare away attacking beasts. More importantly, primitive humans could also use fire to drive wild animals that originally lived in caves out of them, and then occupy those caves as their own homes. From then on, humans had fixed dwellings. This was an extremely important thing, because it meant that human use of energy was not only about increasing sources, but also about reducing waste and preserving resources. Caves could store extra food and fuel. During winter, they could also help humans resist strong cold winds. Although many animals also hide in caves or burrow underground to hibernate during winter, these behaviors come from animal instinct and require a very long time to be obtained through evolution. But humans moving into caves was an active choice. Therefore, the time needed to learn this way of life was relatively much shorter. However, even though caves brought humans so many benefits, humans could not live in them forever. Because if humans wanted to migrate on a large scale, they had to leave caves. And during migration, suitable caves could not always be found. In addition, there was another reason most caves were located far away from plains and rivers, which was also not beneficial to human development. Therefore, in order to solve this problem, between 800,000 and 200,000 years ago, humans gradually mastered the technology of building houses by themselves. However, during this period, the vast majority of human houses were built from animal hides and animal bones. The effects of these houses in resisting wild animals, storing food, and sheltering people from wind and rain were still far inferior to caves. So for a very long time after houses appeared, humans actually did not change their habit of preferring to live in caves. Until tens of thousands of years ago, humans still mainly lived in large caves. However, as houses were built more and more firmly, especially after rammed earth outer walls appeared, the houses built by humans surpassed caves and became the preferred choice for living. This prompted humans to leave caves and begin choosing to settle on plains. And the appearance of settled life further gave humans the conditions for large-scale group living. Large-scale group living allowed human tribes and clans to unite, hunt large animals, reclaim land, carry out various forms of construction, and gain an advantage in competition against other human species. Therefore, forming large-scale tribes was a necessary path for humans to transition from prehistoric civilization to early civilization. However, in the process of humans migrating to different parts of the world, fire and houses alone were still not enough. This was especially true when migrating toward high latitude and cold regions. In order to resist the cold, humans had to think of every possible way to keep warm. Therefore, putting on thick clothing became a highly cost-effective, or rather inevitable, option. Just as humans moving into caves was a conscious and active choice, humans putting on clothing was also a conscious and active choice. Moving from a warm place to a cold place, if it were other animals, they might have had to spend millions of years evolving thick layers of fat in order to adapt to climate change. But the subjective initiative possessed by humans, or in other words their creativity, made this process extremely short. It took modern humans no more than 20,000 years in total to leave Africa and reach the freezing lands of Siberia. Clothing can be said to have played an indispensable role. So now, an interesting question arises. Did humans leave Africa only after putting on clothing, or did they put on clothing because of the cold after leaving Africa? This question also troubled anthropologists for a long time. But later, based on calculations of the time when ancient humans lost their body hair, people estimated that the time when humans began wearing clothing was around 72,000 years ago. And this point in time was almost exactly when modern humans left Africa. It can be seen that our ancestors only set out on their journey around the world after making thorough preparations. And in the process of leaving Africa, besides keeping warm, there was another matter that was also extremely important: ensuring their own safety. Because fighting against large animals or fighting with other humans was full of danger. Therefore, the importance of weapons began to stand out. At that time, weapons basically existed in the form of stabbing weapons and projectile weapons, such as spears, javelins, bows and arrows, and so on. Slashing weapons like knives and swords had not yet appeared at that time. This was mainly because unlocking the skill of metallurgy was the prerequisite for making slashing weapons, and humans at the time clearly did not yet possess such an ability. However, although these primitive weapons look very crude to us today, they could still create differences in combat effectiveness. In fact, modern humans experienced two migrations out of Africa. The first occurred between 130,000 and 110,000 years ago. However, this attempt was not successful. Apart from a small number of people who crossed the Red Sea and entered the Arabian Peninsula, the vast majority of the rest were wiped out around 80,000 years ago by the Neanderthals of Europe and Asia Minor, or returned to Africa after being defeated. There were many reasons for this failure, but one very important point was that the two sides had not created a clear gap in weapons. Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals possessed the ability to use spears. But the Neanderthals, who had settled in Europe earlier than Homo sapiens, had the upper hand in physical strength. They were clearly stronger, with tall bodies and relatively short, thick limbs. This body type had a higher blood circulation efficiency, making them more suitable for living in Europe, which was still extremely cold at the time. However, when Homo sapiens left Africa for the second time, the situation changed somewhat. This time, they brought more advanced weapons with them: javelins and bows and arrows that could be used from a distance. This allowed Homo sapiens to clearly gain the upper hand in their competition with Neanderthals, laying the foundation for their successful migration out of Africa. And it was from this point onward that war became an important force driving the progress of human technology. However, although weapons were important for modern humans to defeat other human species and ultimately dominate the Earth, they were not the decisive factor. Because the more crucial point was that they had mastered a unique secret skill: language. In fact, for a very long time, humans did not know where their ability for language came from. It was not until the 21st century, through in-depth genetic research, that we basically solved this mystery. The key to human language ability comes from a genetic location known as FOX2. This gene is a very ancient gene found in mammals. Even mice have it. However, it changes very slowly in mammals. Among the 715 types of proteins synthesized from this gene in chimpanzees and mice, only one is different. This means that, counting from 70 million years ago, when humans and mice shared a common ancestor, to 5 million years ago, when humans and chimpanzees embarked on different evolutionary paths, during those 65 million years in between, this gene changed almost not at all. But in the 5 million years after that, the rate of change in this gene suddenly accelerated. By the time humans appeared, the proteins synthesized by FOX2 in humans were already completely different from those in chimpanzees. However, having the language ability granted by genes does not mean that language would necessarily appear. Human language was actually a process that combined passive evolution with active invention. At first, humans may have been like other animals, only able to express vague meanings through simple sounds. But as the range of human activity expanded, and as the number of things humans needed to deal with increased, these once simple sounds gradually became more and more complex and more abstract. In the process of information exchange, humans began to use the same sounds to express certain common elements, such as objects, numbers, and actions. This formed the earliest concepts and vocabulary. And when enough of these concepts and words had accumulated, language was born. It was precisely because Homo sapiens prioritized mastering the extremely important skill of language on the road of evolution that their communication ability created a significant gap between them and other humans of the same period. In battles against Neanderthals, Homo sapiens could use language to accurately describe their actions. For example, after how long, at what place, and by whom an attack would be launched in a certain direction. In contrast, Neanderthals, who did not have language ability, could not quickly organize defense and counterattacks. Therefore, they were bound to be defeated in the competition with Homo sapiens and eventually disappeared into the long river of history. Looking back at the development of prehistoric humans, we can see that the use of tools and fire greatly improved the efficiency with which humans obtained energy. The invention of clothing and houses allowed humans to effectively reduce energy consumption and store surplus energy, thereby actively changing the surrounding environment. At the same time, reducing energy consumption also allowed humans to carry out long-distance migrations, especially into extremely cold regions. The invention of weapons allowed modern humans to gain the upper hand in competition with other human species. As for the emergence of language ability, it enabled modern humans to transmit information more effectively and organize members of their own kind to complete large-scale tasks. There is one view which holds that only when the energy created by human activity is more than twice the energy humans consume each day can humans possibly do things such as sewing clothing, building houses, or domesticating animals. Only then can further development take place. Otherwise, humans can only barely maintain survival. The relationship between energy and technological progress is this. Technological progress allows humans to obtain energy more effectively. And more energy, in turn, allows humans to further develop technology. Thus, humanity gained the possibility of cumulative progress. When time reached between 6000 and 4000 BE, the energy humans could obtain had already reached 3 to 5 times their own consumption. And the key to achieving this was the emergence of agriculture. So in the next video, let us continue to follow the direction in which human technology advanced, and together welcome the first shining ray of dawn of human civilization. All right, that is all for this episode. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like, comment, and share, or click follow. We will see you again very soon.
或是点击关注，我们很快再见。